When the fire investigator looked me in the eye and asked if anyone else had a key to my apartment, I froze. My penthouse was a fortress. High-security biometric locks, 24-hour concierge. But as he played back the lobby surveillance footage from an hour before the blaze, my knees buckled. I didn't see a stranger in a ski mask. I saw the two people I was supposed to trust most in this world walking out with my safe and a smile. My father told me on the phone that my tragedy was not his problem. He was right. It wasn't his problem. It was his crime. Before I tell you how a single security camera turned the tables on the people who raised me, please verify your subscription to the channel. Hit that like button if you have ever been the one person in your family who gives everything only to be treated like you are nothing. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Jasmine, and at 35 years old, I am a senior financial risk auditor for one of the largest firms in Chicago. My entire career is built on predicting disaster. I look at spreadsheets for billion-dollar corporations, and I tell them where they are bleeding money, where their employees are stealing, and where their empire is about to crumble. I am paid a very high salary to be paranoid. I am paid to see the worst in people. Yet in a twist of irony that would be funny if it hadn't cost me everything I failed to assess the risk sitting at my own Thanksgiving table. It started at 2:14 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. There is a specific silence that exists in a high-rise apartment building at that hour, a heavy, pressurized quiet that usually made me feel safe. That night, the silence was broken not by an alarm, but by the smell. It was acrid and sweet like burning plastic and melting wiring. I woke up coughing, my throat stinging, as if I had swallowed a handful of sand. When I opened my bedroom door, I wasn't met with a hallway. I was met with a wall of black smoke so thick it felt solid. The heat hit me instantly, a physical blow that knocked the breath out of my lungs. I didn't think. I didn't plan. Instinct took over. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and the silk robe hanging on the bedpost. That was it. I didn't grab the laptop containing 3 months of sensitive audit data. I didn't grab the jewelry box on my dresser that held my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only heirloom I actually cared about. I ran. I crawled on my hands and knees across the floorboards I had spent a bonus check refinishing just last year, gasping for air that wasn't there. By the time I stumbled out into the corridor and slammed the heavy fire door behind me, the adrenaline was the only thing keeping me upright. I joined the stream of panicked neighbors rushing down 20 flights of stairs. No one spoke. The fear was too loud for words. We just moved a herd of terrified animals fleeing a predator we couldn't see. When we finally burst out onto the sidewalk of Walker Drive, the freezing wind off the Chicago River slapped my face, mixing with the sweat and soot on my skin. I turned around and looked up. It is a surreal thing to watch your life burn. You expect it to look like a movie, dramatic and slow. But it was chaotic and fast. Flames were licking out of the windows of the 20th floor, my sanctuary. I stood there shivering in my thin pajamas and bare feet on the icy concrete, watching the glass of my living room window explode outwards. A shower of sparks rained down like a twisted firework display. That window was where I drank my coffee every morning. That window looked out over the city I had conquered. Now it was just a jagged, mouth-breathing fire. A paramedic draped a scratchy wool blanket over my shoulders and checked my vitals, but I waved him away. I wasn't hurt. Physically, I was fine. But as the reality set in, the shock began to wear off, replaced by a cold, hollow terror. I had nothing. No ID, no credit cards, no shoes, no keys to a car that was parked in the underground garage, which was now flooded with water from the fire hoses. I was a 35-year-old woman who managed millions of dollars in assets, and I effectively didn't exist. My first thought, the thought that every child has when the world collapses around them, was of my parents. It didn't matter that I was a grown woman. It didn't matter that our relationship had been strained for years. It didn't matter that I was the one who paid off their mortgage 3 years ago, or that I was the one who funded my brother Tevin's 3 failed startup businesses. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, I just wanted to hear my dad's voice. I wanted him to say he was coming to get me. I wanted to go home. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone. The screen was cracked, probably from when I scrambled out of the bedroom, but it still worked. I dialed my father, Harold. It rang 4 times. 5 times. I pictured the landline sitting on the side table in their comfortable suburban home in Oak Park, a home I helped renovate. Finally, a click. Hello? Harold's voice was groggy, thick with sleep and irritation. Jasmine, do you have any idea what time it is? Dad? I choked out, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears, raspy from the smoke. Dad, it's gone. My apartment. The building is on fire. There was a pause. Not a pause of shock, but a pause of someone processing an annoyance. On fire, he repeated flatly. Are you hurt? No, I am outside. I am safe. But Dad, I lost everything. My wallet, my clothes, my computer. Everything is gone. I am standing on the street in my pajamas. I waited for the rush of concern. I waited for him to say, stay there. I am starting the car. I waited for the father I saw in movies, the protector. Instead, I heard him sigh. A heavy, long exhalation of breath that sounded like he was dealing with a telemarketer rather than his daughter, who had just escaped an inferno. Well, that is terrible, Jasmine. Really terrible. But what do you want me to do about it at 3 in the morning? The question hit me harder than the heat of the fire. I stammered, confused. I don't have anywhere to go, Dad. I don't have my ID to check into a hotel. I don't have a credit card. I just need you to come pick me up. I just need to sleep at home for a night or two until I can sort this out with the bank and the insurance company. There was a muffled sound on the other end, like a hand over the receiver, and then the murmur of my mother, Linda. I heard her ask, "Is that her again? What does she want?" My father came back on the line, his voice firmer this time, stripped of any pretense of sympathy. "Look, Jasmine, your mother has had a migraine all day. She finally just got to sleep. If you come over here now dragging all that drama and the smell of smoke, you are going to wake her up and stress her out. You know how her blood pressure gets." My jaw dropped. I stared at the burning building, the orange light reflecting in the puddles of water on the street. "Dad, my house just burned down. I am barefoot." "You are 35 years old, Jasmine," he snapped. "You are a wealthy woman. You have insurance for this, don't you? You are the risk expert, right? Surely you have a contingency plan that doesn't involve waking up your sick mother in the middle of the night." "But I don't have my wallet," I whispered, tears finally spilling over hot tracks through the soot on my cheeks. "Then call a friend. Call one of your fancy colleagues. But do not come here. We have a lot going on tomorrow. Tevin is bringing Amber over for brunch and we need the house to be peaceful. We can't handle your crisis right now. It is not our problem that you weren't careful." He didn't even say goodbye. He just hung up. The line went dead and I stood there clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sirens wailed around me. The firefighters shouted orders. The building groaned as the roof partially collapsed, but all I could hear was that click. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a clarification. For years I had told myself that my family was just hard on me because they wanted me to be tough. I told myself that their coldness was a form of love, that they pushed me because they saw my potential. I justified every check I wrote, every bill I paid, every time I bailed my brother Tevin out of trouble, thinking I was buying my place at the table. I thought I was earning their love. But standing there in the freezing Chicago wind, I realized the truth. I wasn't their daughter. I was their insurance policy. I was their bank. And when the bank burned down, they didn't mourn the loss of the person inside. They just moved on to protect their peace. A Red Cross volunteer approached me again holding a clipboard. "Ma'am, do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" A relative. I looked at her kind face. I looked at the phone in my hand. "No," I said, my voice steadying, cooling into the professional tone I used in boardrooms when delivering bad news. "No relatives. I am alone." She directed me to a shuttle bus that took us to a budget motel near the airport. It was the kind of place with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The Red Cross gave me a voucher for 2 nights and a toiletry kit with a travel-sized toothbrush and a bar of soap. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the synthetic sheets rough against my legs. I turned on the small television in the corner, flipping to the local news. There was my building engulfed in flames. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Luxury downtown high-rise fire, no casualties reported. No casualties." That was what the news said. But they were wrong. The Jasmine who believed in unconditional love had died in that fire. The Jasmine who believed that blood was thicker than water had burned to ash. I lay back on the pillows staring at the water-stained ceiling. I didn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying the conversation with my father. And then a darker thought began to creep in. A thought that my risk auditor brain couldn't ignore. My father had said, "It is not our problem that you weren't careful." How did he know I wasn't careful? I hadn't told him how the fire started. I hadn't told him anything other than the building was burning. The fire investigator hadn't even entered the building yet. Why did he assume it was my fault? Why was he so quick to mention Tevin and Amber coming over the next day? And then I remembered something else. Something small. Something I hadn't thought about in months. Last week my mother had asked to borrow my spare key. She said she wanted to come into the city to water my plants while I was on a business trip, even though I have a self-watering system. I had given it to her because I was desperate to please her, desperate for her to feel involved in my life. I sat up in the bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, harder than it had when I was running from the flames. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, sharp suspicion. I wasn't just a victim of a tragedy. I was a variable in an equation that didn't add up. I needed to see the report. I needed to see the footage. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to use my skills to save a corporation. I was going to use them to audit my own family. The sun was beginning to rise, casting a gray, grim light over the motel parking lot. I didn't know it yet, but the fire was just the beginning. The real burn was about to come from the truth. The morning sun did not bring relief. It only exposed the damage. I sat in the back of the Uber, watching the city skyline recede, a jagged row of teeth against the pale gray sky. One of those teeth was black and hollow now, a burnt-out shell where my life used to be. The driver, a kind-eyed older man, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I knew what he saw. A woman in soot-stained pajamas, hair matted with ash, smelling like a campfire that had gone horribly wrong. He didn't ask questions, and for that I was grateful. I didn't have the energy to explain that the woman who usually sat in the back of luxury sedans checking stocks and closing deals had ceased to exist at 2:14 a.m. We pulled into the driveway of my parents' house in Oak Park. It was a beautiful home, a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. It should be beautiful. I had paid for the new siding 3 years ago, when my father claimed the old wood was rotting and bringing down property values. I had paid for the landscaping that lined the walkway with perfectly trimmed boxwoods. I had paid for the roof. Seeing it now pristine and peaceful felt like a slap in the face. It was a monument to my financial sacrifice, a sanctuary I had built for them, and yet I felt like an intruder before I even stepped out of the car. I tipped the driver with the last cash I had scrounged from my emergency pocket in the robe and walked up the driveway. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through deep water. I reached for the front door, my hand trembling. I didn't have a key anymore. My key was melted on a nightstand 20 floors up. I rang the doorbell, the chime echoing inside a cheerful ding-dong sound that felt mockingly bright. I expected my mother. I hoped for my father, despite his cruel words on the phone. Maybe in the light of day he would realize his daughter was in crisis. But the door didn't open wide. It cracked open just a few inches, stopped by the security chain I had insisted they install. Amber's face appeared in the gap. My sister-in-law looked as if she had just stepped out of a catalog. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek high ponytail. Her makeup was flawless. and she was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater set that looked impossibly soft. She blinked at me, her blue eyes widening, not with concern but with something that looked a lot like disgust. "Oh my God, Jasmine," she said, her voice pitched high. She didn't undo the chain. She actually leaned back slightly, wrinkling her nose. "You smell awful. It is like burnt rubber and garbage." "Hello to you too, Amber," I rasped, my throat still raw from the smoke inhalation. "Open the door. I need to come in." She didn't move. She stood there guarding the entrance like a nightclub bouncer. "Listen, Jasmine, this is really not a good time. Tevin is in the living room on a very important Zoom call. He is pitching to those angel investors for his new venture. You know, the crypto mining thing. He needs absolute silence." I stared at her, incredulous. "My apartment burned down, Amber. I am barefoot. I am not here to ruin Tevin's call. I just need to get to the guest bathroom, take a shower, and borrow a computer. I need to log into my work server and freeze my bank accounts." Amber bit her lip, looking torn, but not in a compassionate way. She looked torn between her desire to be a gatekeeper and the social obligation of not leaving a relative on the porch. She finally unhooked the chain and opened the door, but she blocked the way with her body. "Okay, look," she whispered conspiratorially. "You can come in, but you absolutely cannot walk on the carpet. Mom just had the Persian rugs professionally cleaned yesterday. The cleaners charged a fortune. If you track soot onto them, she will literally have a stroke. You have to take off those, whatever those are, on your feet." I looked down at my feet. I was wearing thin hotel slippers the Red Cross volunteer had given me. They were already gray with street grime. I kicked them off, feeling the cold hardwood of the foyer against my soles. I stepped inside and the warmth of the house hit me. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee, the scent of a comfortable, safe Sunday morning. It was the smell of a life I was currently locked out of. As I moved toward the stairs, intending to go straight to the guest room, a voice stopped me cold. "Jasmine." I turned. My mother Linda was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She held a spatula in one hand. She looked at me, her eyes sweeping up and down my disheveled frame. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flicker of shock. I braced myself for the hug. I braced myself for her to drop the spatula and run to me, to grab my face and thank God that her only daughter was alive. But the spatula didn't drop. Her grip on it tightened. "You look terrible," she said. "I almost died, Mom," I said, my voice breaking. The emotional dam was starting to crack. I just needed her to be a mother. I know," she said impatiently, waving the spatula like she was swatting away a fly. "Your father told me. It is a tragedy. But Jasmine, I have to ask you something before I forget." She took a step closer, her expression intense. "The vintage Louis Vuitton Speedy bag. The one I gave you last week to take to that specialist in the city for the zipper repair. Was that in the apartment?" The air left the room. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I stood there swaying slightly, trying to process the question. My home was a pile of ash. My life was in ruins. And she was asking about a purse. "The bag," I whispered. "Yes, the bag, Jasmine," she snapped, her voice rising. "That was your grandmother's. It is worth thousands. Please tell me you didn't leave it in the closet. You know how important that heirloom is to this family." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the lines of worry on her forehead, but they weren't for me. They were for leather and canvas. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. I ran out in my pajamas. I didn't grab my laptop. I didn't grab my wallet. I didn't grab the jewelry you gave me for graduation. I didn't grab the bag. It burned. It all burned. Linda's face crumpled, but not with sympathy. She looked angry. She let out a loud, exasperated sigh and threw her hands up. "Unbelievable. Simply unbelievable. I ask you to do one simple favor for me. One thing. And you let it burn. You are so careless, Jasmine. You always have been. You focus so much on your career and your big city life that you don't take care of the things that actually matter." Before I could respond, before I could scream that I mattered, that I was the one who mattered, heavy footsteps approached from the living room. My brother Tevin walked into the foyer. He was the golden boy, the prince of the family. He was 30 years old and had never held a job for more than 6 months, yet he walked with the swagger of a CEO. Today he was dressed the part. He was wearing a sharp navy blue bespoke suit. I recognized the cut. I recognized the fabric. I should, considering I had paid off the credit card bill he used to buy it 3 months ago. He held a mug of coffee in one hand and an iPad in the other. He stopped when he saw me, a slow, mocking grin spreading across his face. "Well, well, well," he drawled. "Look what the cat dragged in. Or should I say what the fire truck dragged in?" He took a sip of his coffee, looking me over with amusement. "You look rough, Jazz. Like really rough. I guess that high horse you ride around on didn't have a sprinkler system, huh?" "Tevin," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need to borrow your laptop. Mine is destroyed. I need to get into my cloud accounts. It is an emergency." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Can't do it, sis. I'm in the middle of closing a massive deal. I can't have you messing up my flow. Besides, I don't want you getting ash all over my keyboard. This is a MacBook Pro, not a library terminal." "Tevin, please," I begged, hating myself for it. "It will take 5 minutes." "No can do," he said, turning his back on me. "Why don't you use your phone?" "Oh wait, that's right. You probably don't even have a phone plan anymore if you missed the bill payment." He looked at Amber and winked. Amber giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. It was a cruel little girl sound. "Maybe you should go to the public library, Jasmine," Amber suggested, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "They have computers for people in your situation. You know, the homeless. They are very accommodating." I looked at them, the three of them. My mother mourning a purse. My brother wearing a suit I paid for, mocking my downfall. My sister-in-law terrified of a dirty footprint. They stood together, a united front of selfishness. I realized then that I wasn't family to them. I was a resource, and a resource that had just run dry was of no use to them. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. A cold calm settled over me, freezing the tears in my eyes. I looked at Tevin's new suit. I looked at the diamond studs in Amber's ears. I looked at the granite countertops in the kitchen behind my mother. I saw the receipts. I saw my own money staring back at me, worn by people who wouldn't give me 5 minutes on a computer. "Fine," I said. My voice was steady, dead calm. "I will go to the library." I didn't wait for them to answer. I turned around and walked to the door. I shoved my feet back into the dirty slippers. "Jasmine, wait," my mother called out. I paused, hand on the doorknob. A tiny, foolish part of me thought she was going to apologize. "Don't slam the door," she said. "The hinge is a little loose. Tevin said he would fix it, but he has been so busy." I opened the door. I looked back at them one last time. I wanted to remember this picture. I wanted to burn it into my memory so that when the guilt came creeping back later, I would have this shield. "Don't worry, Mom," I said. "I won't break anything else of yours." I stepped out into the cold morning air and closed the door softly behind me. As I walked down the driveway, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like an auditor who had just discovered a massive discrepancy in the books, and I was going to find out exactly where the numbers didn't add up. The walk to the library was 3 miles. I started walking. The investigation had officially begun. The coffee shop on the corner of Elm and State was loud, filled with the grinding of espresso beans and the frantic typing of college students, but it was the only place I could find with free Wi-Fi and a corner dark enough to hide my appearance. I huddled over a borrowed tablet I had managed to acquire from an old friend who lived uptown, trying to salvage what was left of my professional life. I was wearing a generic gray tracksuit I had bought with the last of my cash from a discount store down the street, having finally discarded the soot-stained pajamas. I looked like someone who had just come from the gym, not someone who had just come from the ashes of her own existence. I was in the middle of drafting an email to the managing partner of my firm, trying to explain why I would be working remotely for the unforeseen future when my phone buzzed on the sticky table. The screen was shattered, a spider web of cracks obscuring the caller ID, but I could make out the words Fire Investigation Unit. My stomach dropped. I had been expecting a call from the insurance adjuster, a bureaucrat who would ask about receipts and policy numbers. I was not expecting the investigation unit. In my line of work, when the investigators called you directly, it meant the numbers didn't add up. It meant they suspected fraud. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. "This is Jasmine," I said, my voice sounding more steady than I felt. I slipped instantly into my work persona, the cold, analytical auditor who didn't let emotions cloud the data. "Ms. Williams, this is Investigator Vance," a gravelly voice responded. It was a voice that sounded like it had inhaled too much smoke over a lifetime of digging through rubble. "I am the lead investigator assigned to the fire at your residence at the Millennium Tower. I need to ask you a few questions. Are you in a safe place to talk?" I looked around the bustling cafe. No one was paying attention to the woman in the gray tracksuit. "Yes," I said. "I am listening." "I need you to walk me through your departure from the apartment last night," Vance said. His tone was neutral, but I could hear the pen scratching on paper in the background. I told him everything. The smell of smoke waking me up at 2:14 a.m., the wall of heat, the way I grabbed my robe and ran. I told him I didn't stop to lock the door because the electronic lock engaged automatically. I told him I didn't see anyone in the hallway. I answered every question with the precision of a suspect trying to prove their innocence, because deep down I knew that in cases of high-value property loss, the owner is always the first suspect. "Thank you, Ms. Williams," Vance said after I finished. "Now I need to share some preliminary findings with you, and I need you to prepare yourself, because what I'm about to tell you changes the nature of this case significantly." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. "What do you mean? Was it a gas leak? An electrical short?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Williams, we have examined the point of origin. It was in the living room, specifically near the heavy curtains by the south wall. But that is not what concerns me. What concerns me is the smoke detector in that zone." "It didn't go off?" I asked, confused. "I heard the building alarm, but I don't remember hearing the one in my unit." "It didn't go off because it was disabled," Vance said. "The battery was removed. And not only that, the hardwire connection was severed. This wasn't a malfunction or a lack of maintenance. Someone stood on a chair, opened the casing, and manually disconnected the device. Based on the dust patterns, this happened less than an hour before the fire started." The room seemed to tilt. The noise of the coffee shop faded into a dull roar. "Disabled manually." "Yes." Vance continued, his voice hardening. "And there is more. We found your wall safe. It fell through the floor to the unit below, but the structure remained intact. However, the door was not pried open. There were no tool marks on the hinges. The digital keypad was intact. The safe was opened with the correct passcode." I felt the blood drain from my face. My safe. The safe hidden behind the painting I had bought in Paris. The safe that was biometric and code protected. "Was it empty?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "It was empty." Miss Williams Vance confirmed. "We found traces of paper ash inside, suggesting some documents were left behind and burned, but the contents were gone. I need you to tell me exactly what was in that safe. This is crucial for the police report." Police report. The words echoed in my head. This wasn't an accident. This was a crime scene. I closed my eyes, visualizing the interior of the steel box. I had $200,000 in cash and 4 stacks of 50. $200,000 in cash, Vance repeated slowly. "That is a significant amount of liquidity to keep at home. Can you explain the source of those funds?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I withdrew it 3 days ago. I was planning to make a down payment on a vacation home in Florida. It was supposed to be a surprise anniversary gift for my parents. I wanted to hand them the deed and the keys in cash so there would be no paper trail for the IRS to tax them on a gift." It was stupid. I know it was stupid. I didn't tell Vance the full truth. I didn't tell him that I was buying the house in my name, but letting them live there because I knew my father would gamble away the title if he owned it. I didn't tell him that the cash was the only way to ensure the deal closed fast enough for their anniversary. And was there anything else? Vance asked. Yes, I choked out. A velvet pouch. Inside was a vintage pearl necklace with a diamond clasp. It belonged to my grandmother. It was the only thing she left me when she passed. She didn't leave anything to my brother, only to me. It was appraised at $50,000, but it was the only thing I had of hers. The silence on the line was heavy, so we are looking at $250,000 in theft, followed by arson to cover the tracks Vance summarized. Ms. Williams, I have checked the building's main server. The concierge logs show that no guests were signed into your unit yesterday. There was no forced entry on your front door. The electronic log shows your specific key fob was used to enter the apartment at 1:15 a.m. That is 1 hour before the fire. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. That is impossible, I said. I was asleep. My key fob was on my nightstand. It melted in the fire. Then there is a duplicate, Vance said. Or someone had your spare. Ms. Williams, I need you to think very carefully. Who has a key to your apartment? Who knows the code to your safe? I opened my mouth to say no one. I was a risk auditor. I didn't trust anyone. I lived alone. I didn't have a cleaning lady. I used a service that sent different people every time, and I stayed home while they worked. I didn't have a boyfriend. My ex hadn't had a key in 2 years, and I had changed the lock since then. And then the memory hit me. It hit me harder than the realization of the fire itself. Last Tuesday. My mother. I remembered standing in the foyer of my apartment. My mother had come over for lunch, which was rare. She had been unusually nice, complimenting my curtains, asking about my work. As she was leaving, she had mentioned she wanted to come into the city the following week to go to a special market near my building. It is such a hassle to park, she had complained, giving me that look. The look that said I owed her. Owed. Can't I just park in your guest spot and rest in your apartment for an hour before I drive back in traffic? I could water your plants for you. You said the ficus looked dry. I had hesitated. I always hesitated. But then the guilt kicked in. The eternal guilt of the successful daughter who left the family behind. I wanted to be a good daughter. I wanted her to feel welcome in my home. So I went to the drawer. I took out the spare key fob, the one I kept for emergencies. Here, Mom, I had said. Just drop it in the mailbox when you leave. And the safe, I had opened the safe in front of her that day to put away a contract. I didn't think she was watching, but my mother had eyes like a hawk when it came to money. She must have seen me punch in the code. Or maybe she had seen me write it in the emergency contact notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer, the one she was rummaging through, looking for a pen. Ms. Williams Vance's voice cut through the memory. I couldn't breathe. The air in the coffee shop suddenly felt thin. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random burglar. A stranger wouldn't know about the safe. A stranger wouldn't have the code. A stranger wouldn't have the key fob that registered as mine. Only one person had that key. Ms. Williams, are you still there? Who has the key? I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of the tablet. I looked tired. I looked broken. But under the exhaustion, something else was igniting. It was a flame hotter and more destructive than the one that had consumed my apartment. It was the fire of realization. My mother, I whispered. My voice was so quiet I wasn't sure he heard me. Excuse me, Vance asked. My mother, I said louder this time, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Linda Williams, she has the spare key. I hung up the phone before he could ask another question. I didn't need to hear his next words. I didn't need him to tell me what I already knew. My family hadn't just abandoned me after the fire, they had lit the match. I sat there in the coffee shop surrounded by strangers, and for the first time in 35 years I stopped crying. Tears were for people who had lost something. I hadn't lost my family. I had finally found them. I finally saw them for exactly who they were. I looked at the tablet. I opened a new browser window. I wasn't going to check my work email anymore. I typed in the URL for my private cloud server, the one that hosted the backup footage from the hidden cameras I had installed 3 years ago, cameras I had installed not to catch thieves, but to monitor the cleaning crews. I had forgotten about them until this very second. If my mother used that key, the camera in the smoke detector, the very smoke detector they disabled, would have seen who climbed up on the chair to turn it off. I logged in. The loading wheel spun. My hands were steady now. I wasn't a victim anymore, I was an auditor, keying. And I was about to conduct the most ruthless audit of my life. The spinning wheel on the center of the tablet screen felt like a hypnotist's pendulum mocking my anxiety with every rotation. I was sitting in the corner of the coffee shop, my back pressed against the cold brick wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The world outside the window was moving at its normal chaotic pace, people rushing to work, cars, honking, life continuing, but my world had shrunk down to this 10-inch screen and the terrible truth it was about to reveal. I had installed the hidden camera system 3 years ago, not because I suspected my family, but because I suspected everyone. It was an occupational hazard. When you spend your days analyzing how employees embezzle millions from their companies, or how CEOs hide assets in offshore shell accounts, you stop trusting appearances. I had bought a high-end spy camera disguised as a smoke detector from a surveillance specialty store in Germany. It was battery-operated, completely independent of the apartment's electrical grid, and it uploaded motion-activated clips directly to a private encrypted server. I had placed it in the hallway ceiling right outside the bedroom and living room, giving it a perfect panoramic view of the apartment's core. The loading bar finally hit 100%. A list of video files appeared time-stamped and dated. My finger hovered over the glass. There were 3 clips from last night. The first one was stamped 1:13 a.m. I took a deep breath, put on my wired headphones and pressed play. The video quality was startlingly clear. The night vision mode turned the familiar gray and white tones of my hallway into a ghostly greenish monochrome. The apartment was dark and silent for the first few seconds. Then the front door clicked. I watched, my breath held in my throat, as the heavy oak door swung open. A figure stepped in. Even in the green grain of the night vision, I recognized the silhouette immediately. It was the slouch of someone trying to look confident, but failing. It was Tevin. He was wearing a hoodie pulled up over his head, but he pushed it back as soon as he was inside, revealing his face. He looked sweaty, his eyes darting around the hallway nervously. He didn't look like a criminal mastermind, he looked like a frightened child playing dress-up. Then a second figure pushed past him. Amber. She wasn't wearing a hoodie. She walked in with her chin held high, looking around my apartment with an expression of pure disdain. She was wearing gloves, latex ones like a surgeon. The sight of those gloves sent a chill down my spine that was colder than the Chicago wind. It proved premeditation. It proved they hadn't just made a spur-of-the-moment decision. They had planned this. I turned up the volume on the tablet. The microphone on the camera was sensitive, picking up the rustle of their clothes and their whispered, frantic voices. "Is the alarm off?" Amber hissed, her voice cutting through the static. "I used Mom's code," Tevin whispered back. He sounded breathless. "It disarms the perimeter sensors. But we have to be quick. Jasmine said her flight lands at 10 tomorrow morning, but you know how she is. She might change plans. So they thought I was in D.C. I had mentioned a potential trip a week ago, but it had been canceled at the last minute. I hadn't bothered to update them because we rarely spoke unless they needed money. They thought the apartment was empty." "Stop shaking, you idiot," Amber snapped at him, grabbing his arm. "Where is the safe? You said you knew where the safe was." "It is behind the painting in the living room," Tevin said, pointing off screen. But Amber, are you sure about this? If she finds out, she won't find out. Amber interrupted, her voice dripping with venom. She has plenty of money. She won't even miss a few stacks of cash. Besides, we deserve it. You need that capital for the crypto launch. Do you want to be a loser your whole life living in your sister's shadow? I watched my brother flinch. That was her hook. She knew exactly where to twist the knife to make him dance. Just do it, she commanded. They moved out of the frame toward the living room. I switched to the next video file stamped 1:25 a.m. They were back in the hallway view, but now they were carrying things. Tevin was struggling with a heavy duffel bag. I knew what was inside. My cash. The $200,000 I had worked 80-hour weeks to save. The money intended for the house they would eventually live in. Amber was holding something else. She was holding the velvet pouch, my grandmother's pearls. She opened the pouch right there in the hallway, pulling out the necklace. Even in the green light, the pearls shimmered. She held them up to her neck, admiring herself in the hallway mirror. Classy, she muttered. Old lady stuff, but I can get at least 10 grand for this at the pawn shop downtown. Don't wear it, Tevin hissed. Put it in the bag. We have to go. Amber rolled her eyes and shoved the necklace into her pocket. Not the bag. Her pocket. She was stealing from the heist. She was stealing from Tevin, too. Okay, we got the cash, we got the jewelry, Tevin said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Let's get out of here. I need to get home and establish an alibi. Not yet, Amber said. She stood still, looking around the apartment. Her eyes landed on the curtains in the living room, visible through the archway. What do you mean? Not yet, Tevin asked, panic rising in his voice. We have the money. We have to cover our tracks, Tevin, she said calmly. Too calmly. If she comes home and finds the safe empty, she will call the police. She will check the building cameras. She will find out Mom gave us the key. So what do? We make sure there is nothing left to investigate, Amber said. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a long-barreled lighter, the kind I used for my aromatherapy candles. Amber, no, Tevin whispered. You can't be serious. This is a high-rise. People live here. Nobody is going to get hurt, she said dismissively. The sprinklers will handle it. We just need to create enough damage to destroy the room where the safe was. It has to look like an electrical fire. She walked out of the frame into the living room. Tevin stayed in the hallway, wringing his hands. He looked like he wanted to run, but he was too weak, too cowardly to stop her. A moment later, a flicker of light danced on the wall, then a glow, then the crackling sound of dry fabric catching fire. Amber walked back into the frame. She was smiling. It was a small, tight smile of satisfaction. Done, she said. Let's go. Tevin looked at the orange glow growing brighter in the living room. He looked at me, or rather at the camera he didn't know was there. What if she came back early? He whispered. Then she should have told us, Amber said cold-bloodedly. Not our problem. She grabbed his arm and dragged him toward the door. They slipped out the heavy oak door, clicking shut behind them. The video ended. I sat there in the coffee shop, the tablet screen turning black as the clip finished. For a moment, I felt nothing. It was as if my brain had short-circuited, unable to process the magnitude of what I had just seen. And then it hit me. A wave of nausea so violent it doubled me over. I scrambled out of my chair, knocking the tablet onto the table, and sprinted toward the restroom at the back of the shop. I barely made it to the stall before my stomach purged itself. I retched until there was nothing left my body, trying to expel the toxicity of what I had just witnessed. It wasn't just the theft. I dealt with theft every day. People stole for greed, for desperation. I understood that. It was the fire. It was the way Amber had flicked that lighter without a second of hesitation. It was the way Tevin had stood there and let her do it. They didn't know I was sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. They thought I was in D.C. Yes, but they were willing to risk the lives of hundreds of other people in my building just to cover up a robbery. They were willing to burn down my sanctuary, the only place in the world where I felt safe, just because they felt entitled to my money. And that line that echoed what my father had said on the phone. Not our problem. It was a family motto, a mantra of selfishness that ran through their veins like a genetic disease. I flushed the toilet and stood up. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed with dark circles. My skin was pale, I looked like a victim. I took a paper towel and wiped my face. I scrubbed hard until the skin was pink and raw. No, not a victim. I straightened my back. I looked at my reflection again. The woman staring back at me was not the sister who begged for approval. She was not the daughter who bought love with mortgages and business loans. She was the senior financial risk auditor who had just discovered a massive internal fraud. I walked back to the table. I picked up the tablet. I didn't delete the videos. I downloaded them. I made 3 copies, one to the cloud, one to a secure external drive I kept virtually, and one attached to a draft email addressed to Detective Vance. But I didn't hit send. Not yet. Sending this to the police now would put them in jail, yes. But jail was too easy. Jail was 3 hot meals and a bed. Jail was a story they could spin to their friends about how the system was unfair. I wanted more than justice. I wanted restitution. I wanted them to feel the same sense of total loss I had felt standing on that sidewalk in my pajamas. I wanted to strip them of every layer of comfort, every illusion of status, every dollar they thought they deserved. I closed the tablet. My hands were steady. The nausea was gone, replaced by a cold, hard hunger. I needed to make a phone call. Not to the police, but to my lawyer, Mr. Cohen. It was time to audit the Williams family assets, and I was going to make sure that when I was done, they would be the ones standing in the ashes. The nausea had passed, replaced by a cold, mechanical clarity. I sat back down at the table, wiped the screen of my tablet with the sleeve of my gray tracksuit, and cracked my knuckles. For the last 10 years, I had built a reputation in Chicago as the woman you called when the numbers didn't make sense. I was a forensic accountant, a bloodhound for digital trails. I could find a missing dime in a billion-dollar ledger. My family thought I was just good at math. They didn't understand that my job wasn't about arithmetic. It was about psychology. It was about understanding, desperation. Tevin and Amber were greedy, yes. But the sloppy nature of this crime didn't smell like simple greed. Greed is usually patient. Greed siphons money over years, breaking into my apartment, stealing a safe, and then setting a fire that could land them in prison for life. That wasn't greed. That was panic. I needed to know why. I needed to know who was holding the gun to their heads so I could make sure I was the one pulling the trigger in the end. I opened my toolkit. Not a physical box, but a suite of software I used for work. I started with the basics. I pulled up Tevin's credit report. Because I had co-signed on his student loans a decade ago, loans he had sworn he was paying, but clearly wasn't, I still had lawful access to view the status of accounts linked to my social security number. The screen filled with red, filled. It was a financial massacre. Tevin had maxed out 7 credit cards in the last 6 months, not just normal spending. I was seeing cash advances, high-interest cash advances at 29% APR. He was bleeding money. But where was it going? I moved to the public court records. I searched his name in Cook County. There were 3 liens against his car, the flashy Mercedes he drove to show off at church. He hadn't made a payment in 4 months. There was a lawsuit filed by a vendor for his failed drop shipping business. But none of this explained the fire. You don't burn down your sister's high-rise for a few car payments. This was bigger. I remembered something he had bragged about at Christmas. He had been talking loudly about cryptocurrency, about a new coin that was going to the moon. He had called me a dinosaur for keeping my money in mutual funds. I navigated to the blockchain explorer. I didn't have his wallet address Or so he thought, but Tevin was lazy. He used the same username for everything. Tevin, the King 88. I searched for it on the major crypto forums and exchanges. I found a post from him on a Reddit thread 3 months ago begging for technical support because a transaction was stuck. He had foolishly posted his public wallet address in the screenshot. I punched that address into the tracer. The numbers scrolled before my eyes and the picture became clear. My brother wasn't an investor. He was a gambler. And a terrible one. He had leveraged everything. He had borrowed money to buy into a speculative coin that had rug-pulled collapsed completely 2 weeks ago. The chart was a vertical line down. He had lost $150,000 in 48 hours. But the blockchain showed something else. Something terrifying. 3 days ago, just before the fire, there was an incoming transfer to his wallet. $10,000. Then another 5. Then another. These weren't from an exchange. They were from a wallet address that had been flagged in my professional database. In my line of work, we maintain blacklists of wallets associated with money laundering and organized crime. The wallet that had been feeding Tevin money for the last month belonged to a syndicate known for predatory lending in the chaotic world of unregulated crypto loans. These weren't banks. These were digital loan sharks. And when you didn't pay them back, they didn't send a collections letter. They sent people to break your legs. Tevin owed them. He owed them big. And the maturity date on the smart contract was yesterday. I sat back, the puzzle pieces clicking into place with a sickening snap. Tevin was going to be hurt or worse if he didn't come up with a massive lump sum immediately. He didn't have assets. He didn't have credit. He only had a rich sister. But that didn't explain my parents. My mother was selfish, yes, but she was risk-averse. She cared about appearances. Why would she involve herself in a felony? I picked up my phone. I was still on the family plan. I paid the bill every month, which meant I had administrative access to the call logs. I logged into the carrier's website. I filtered the logs for the last 48 hours. The pattern was frantic. 2 days ago, Tevin received a call from an unknown number. It lasted 30 seconds. Immediately after that call, Tevin called our mother, Linda. That call lasted an hour. I could almost hear the conversation. Tevin crying. Tevin telling her he was in trouble. Tevin saying that bad men were coming for him. And what did my mother do? Did she tell him to go to the police? Did she tell him to face the consequences of his own stupidity? 10 minutes after hanging up with Tevin, Linda called me. That was the call. That was the call where she asked to borrow the key to water my plants. I stared at the timestamp, feeling a cold hollowness in my chest. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a rescue mission. My mother had looked at the situation. She saw her golden boy in danger. She saw her scapegoat daughter living in luxury. And she made a choice. She decided that my safety, my home and my hard-earned assets were a fair price to pay to save Tevin from his own mess. They didn't just steal from me because they wanted nice things. They cannibalized me to survive. They fed me to the wolves to save themselves. I looked at the call logs again. There was one more detail. This morning, 8 a.m., a call from Tevin's phone to a number in the Cayman Islands. I traced it. It was a known offshore shell company service. He was trying to move the cash. He wasn't paying off the loan sharks yet. He was trying to hide the money I had intended for their house. He was probably thinking he could double it on another gamble before paying his debts. He was sick. He was an addict. And my parents were his enablers. The anger I felt was no longer hot. It was 0 degrees Kelvin. It was the kind of cold that shatters steel. They thought they had won. They thought the fire had destroyed the evidence. They thought I was the naive, desperate daughter who would cry in a hotel room and then work hard to rebuild so I could take care of them again. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought they were dealing with Jasmine the doormat. They didn't realize they were dealing with Jasmine Williams, senior auditor, a woman who had taken down CEOs and CFOs for less than this. I closed the browser tabs. I had the motive. I had the evidence. I had the trail. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It wasn't the police. The police would arrest them, sure. But the police couldn't hurt them the way I wanted to hurt them. The police couldn't take away the one thing they valued more than me, their status. The phone rang twice. Cohen and Associates, a smooth baritone answered. Mr. Cohen, it is Jasmine, I said. Jasmine, I heard about the fire on the news. Are you all right? Do you need me to handle the insurance claim? No, Saul. I need you to handle something else. I paused, looking out the window at the gray Chicago street. I need you to open a new LLC, an anonymous one, Delaware registration. Use the offshore account so my name appears nowhere on the paperwork. Okay? Saul said, his voice shifting from concerned friend to sharp attorney. What are we buying? We are buying debt, I said. Specifically, I want you to purchase the mortgage note for the property at 422 Oakwood Lane. There was a silence on the line. Saul knew that address. Jasmine, he said slowly, that is your parents' house. I know, I said. I happen to know the bank has been threatening foreclosure for months because my father keeps skipping payments to fund his lifestyle. They will be happy to sell the non-performing note to a private investor for cash. I want to buy the note, Saul. And I want to buy the personal liens against Tevin Williams, all of them. Jasmine, what are you doing? I am acting as a risk auditor. Saul, I said, my voice flat. I have identified a liability in my portfolio, and I am preparing to liquidate it. Do you want to start the foreclosure process immediately? He asked. No, I said. Not yet. I want to own the debt first. I want to hold the paper that says I own the roof over their heads and the shirt on my brother's back. I want everything ready. And Saul, yes. Prepare a civil suit for conversion of assets fraud and emotional distress. But keep it sealed. I am going to have a family dinner with them first. I think it is time we discuss the terms of their eviction face to face. I hung up the phone. The coffee in my cup was cold. I drank it anyway. It tasted bitter, just like the medicine I was about to force down their throats. They wanted to play games with fire, fine. I was about to show them what it really looked like to burn. I stood up, zipped up my gray tracksuit, and walked out of the coffee shop. I had a dinner to attend. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't coming to serve them. I was coming to collect. The wind off Lake Michigan was biting, cutting through the thin fabric of my tracksuit, but for the first time in 24 hours, I didn't feel the cold. I was burning with a different kind of fuel. It was the white-hot, silent combustion of a plan falling into place. Most people, when faced with the kind of betrayal I had just uncovered, would have marched straight to the nearest police precinct. They would have slapped the tablet down on a detective's desk, screamed for justice, and watched their family be handcuffed. But I wasn't most people. I was a risk auditor. I knew that the legal system was slow, clumsy, and often disappointing. If I went to the police now, Tevin and Amber would get lawyers. They would plead out. They would get a few years in a minimum security facility, maybe out in 2 with good behavior. My parents would cry in court, claiming ignorance, playing the role of the heartbroken elderly couple whose children had lost their way. They would keep the house. They would keep their social standing in the church. They would play the victims, and I would just be the angry daughter who sent her brother to prison. That wasn't enough. Not after they left me standing on a sidewalk in my pajamas. Not after they burned my grandmother's pearls. I didn't want just justice. I wanted total liquidation. I wanted to dismantle their lives with the same precision they had used to destroy my home. I wanted them to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet, and I wanted to be the one holding the demolition switch. I paced back and forth on the sidewalk, the phone pressed to my ear, waiting for Mr. Cohen to confirm the transaction. Saul Cohen was the kind of lawyer who didn't ask moral questions as long as the check cleared and the law was technically followed. He was expensive, aggressive, and exactly what I needed. Jasmine Saul's voice finally came back on the line. It is done. Walk me through it, Saul, I said, needing to hear the details. I needed to know the trap was set. It was surprisingly easy, he said, and I could hear the rustle of papers. Your father Harold hasn't paid the mortgage on the Oakwood Lane property in 4 months. He is in pre-foreclosure. The bank has been sending demand letters, but he has been ignoring them, probably hoping to refinance or borrow from you to cover it as usual. I closed my eyes, shaking my head. Of course, that was why they were so desperate. The house of cards was falling, and they needed my cash to prop it up. The bank was more than happy to get this toxic asset off their books. Saul continued. I set up the LLC as you instructed. We called it Nemesis Holdings. The purchase of the mortgage note went through 5 minutes ago. The bank has assigned all rights to the LLC, so I asked, my voice trembling slightly with the weight of the moment. Who owns the house? Technically, your parents still hold the deed, Saul explained. But Nemesis Holdings owns the debt. And since they are in default, Nemesis Holdings has the right to accelerate the loan and demand full payment immediately. If they can't pay Nemesis, Holdings can foreclose and evict them. And since you are the sole member of Nemesis Holdings, I am the bank. I finished the sentence for him. You are the bank, the landlord, and the executioner, Saul corrected. Jasmine, are you sure about this? Once we serve these papers, there is no going back. This is the nuclear option. I looked at the reflection of the burnt-out building in the distance. I thought about Amber flicking that lighter. I thought about my mother worrying about a purse while I was homeless. Send the papers, Saul, I said. But not yet. I want to deliver the news personally. Prepare the foreclosure notice, the civil suit for the theft, and the eviction order. Put them all in a single envelope. I will pick them up from your office in an hour. I hung up. The first phase was complete. I owned the roof over their heads. Now I needed to get them all in one room. I needed a venue for the final act. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the hardest performance of my life. I had to become the victim one last time. I had to play the role they had written for me, the desperate, defeated scapegoat. I dialed my mother's number. It rang and rang. She was probably screening calls, avoiding debt collectors, or maybe avoiding me. Finally, she picked up. What is it now, Jasmine? She sighed. Her voice was irritated, busy. We are getting ready for dinner. Tevin and Amber are here, and we are celebrating Tevin's new business venture. The audacity took my breath away. They were celebrating. They were drinking wine and laughing, likely spending the cash they had stolen from my safe while I was standing on a street corner. Mom! I choked out, forcing a sob into my voice. I dug my fingernails into my palm to generate real tears. Mom, please don't hang up. I don't know what to do. There was a silence. The annoyance in her voice softened slightly, replaced by a smug curiosity. What is wrong? I am leaving, Mom, I said, letting my voice crack. You were right. I wasn't careful. I lost everything. The insurance company is investigating and I can't handle the pressure. I am broke. I am going to move to Atlanta. I have a friend who said I can sleep on her couch for a while until I get a job as a waitress or something. I paused, waiting for her to object, waiting for her to say, "No, you are a brilliant auditor, stay and fight." Instead, she let out a long breath. Well, maybe that is for the best, Jasmine. You always did take on more than you could handle. The city is too much for you. A simpler life might be good. It hurt. Even knowing what I knew, it still hurt to hear her write me off so easily. I wanted to see you all one last time, I pleaded. I am leaving tomorrow morning on the bus. Can I come over for dinner tonight? Just for an hour. I want to say goodbye to you and Dad and Tevin. I want to apologize for being such a burden. That was the key. Apologize. The moment I offered to humble myself, the moment I offered to kiss the ring, I knew she would agree. My mother lived for the moments when she could look down on me. Well, she said, her tone shifting to one of gracious condescension. We are having a celebratory dinner, Jasmine. It is a happy occasion. I don't want you bringing your depression in here and ruining the mood. I won't, Mom. I promise. I will be happy for Tevin. I just want to see the family. Please. I might not come back for a long time. She hesitated, likely weighing the social capital of being the benevolent mother who fed her failed daughter one last meal. "Fine," she said. "Come over at 7. But clean yourself up. Amber said you looked like a hobo this morning. And don't expect a handout. Tevin needs every penny for his investment." "I won't ask for a dime." "Mom," I said. "I just want closure." "I will see you at 7, she said, and clicked off. I lowered the phone, staring at the black screen. Closure. Yes, that was exactly what I was going to get. I hailed a taxi to Saul's office. I didn't have time to shop for clothes, and frankly, I didn't want to. I wanted to walk into that house looking exactly like the wreck they expected. I wanted them to lower their guard. I wanted them to feel superior, safe, and untouchable. When I arrived at the law firm, Saul handed me a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It contained the mortgage assignment, the camera footage, stills, the forensic accounting report of Tevin's debts, and the drafted criminal complaints. "This is everything I asked." "Everything," Saul said, looking at me with a mixture of respect and concern. "You know, Jasmine, most people would just walk away, start over. You have the skills to rebuild." I looked at the envelope. I ran my fingers over the seal. "I am rebuilding, Saul," I said quietly. "But you can't build a strong foundation until you clear away the rot. And this family, they are rotten to the core." I left his office and headed back to the suburbs. The sun was setting, casting long, dark shadows across the manicured lawns of Oakwood Lane. The house looked warm and inviting from the street. The windows were glowing with golden light. I could see silhouettes moving inside. I could imagine the laughter. I could imagine Tevin boasting about his genius, Amber admiring her stolen pearls, my parents nodding in approval of the son who could do no wrong. They were enjoying the last supper of their old lives. They didn't know that the girl walking up the driveway wasn't the daughter who begged for scraps of affection anymore. They didn't know that the true owner of the house had just arrived. I reached the front door. I didn't knock this time. I didn't ring the bell. I still had the garage code. My father never changed it because he couldn't remember new numbers. I punched in the code 1980, Tevin's birth year. Of course. The garage door rumbled open. I walked through the mudroom, the smell of roasted chicken and expensive wine filling my nostrils. I gripped the manila envelope tighter. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt a strange, icy calm. I pushed open the door to the kitchen and stepped into the light. "Surprise!" I whispered to the empty room before walking toward the dining area. "I am home." The kitchen was warm and smelled of rosemary and roasted garlic, the kind of domestic scent that usually signals safety in family. But as I stepped fully into the light, the scene before me felt less like a homecoming and more like a grotesque parody of happiness. My mother was at the island arranging artisan crackers on a silver platter. My father was sitting at the head of the heavy oak dining table, his face flushed with wine and pride. And there, sitting close together like the prom king and queen of a high school for sociopaths, were Tevin and Amber. They didn't hear me at first because the jazz music playing from the surround sound speakers was too loud. They were laughing. It was a rich, full-throated laughter that bounced off the granite countertops I had paid for. Tevin was holding a bottle of vintage Cabernet, the kind that costs $200 a bottle. I recognized the label immediately. It was from the case I had sent my father for his birthday last year. The case, he had told me, was too dry for his taste, yet here they were draining it to the dregs to celebrate their crime. I cleared my throat. The laughter died instantly. 4 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft saxophone notes from the speakers. "Jasmine," my mother said. She didn't smile. She didn't rush over to hug me. She simply wiped her hands on a dish towel and looked me up and down with an expression of mild distaste. "You are late. And look at you. I told you to clean up. You are wearing a tracksuit to a celebration dinner." I looked down at my gray sweats. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, keeping my voice low and trembling. "It is all I have." The fire took the rest. Well, you could have at least brushed your hair, Amber chimed in. She was sitting with her back to the window, the light catching the blonde highlights in her hair. She took a sip of my wine, her pinky finger extended. It is just a little depressing, Jasmine. We are trying to have a good vibe tonight. Tevin just closed a major deal. I looked at my brother. He was avoiding my eyes, focusing intently on the label of the wine bottle. He looked expensive in his suit, but I could see the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He knew what he had done. He just didn't know that I knew. Congratulations, Tevin, I said, walking slowly toward the table. I heard you had a big influx of capital. Tevin choked slightly on his wine. He set the glass down hard. Yeah, he said, his voice a little too loud. Yeah, huge. Crypto mining. It finally paid off. I told you it was the future jazz. You always said it was a scam, but look at me now. I gripped the back of the empty chair opposite him. My knuckles were white. I wasn't looking at his face anymore. I was looking at Amber's neck. Resting against her collarbone, shimmering in the warm light of the chandelier, was a string of pearls. They weren't just any pearls. They were Akoya pearls, perfectly round with a distinctive white gold clasp, shaped like a blooming rose. I stopped breathing for a second. Seeing them on a screen was one thing. Seeing them around the neck of the woman who had set fire to my home was something else entirely. Those pearls had been a gift from my grandmother on my 16th birthday. She had fastened them around my neck and told me that I carried the dignity of the family. Now they were being worn by a thief. That is a beautiful necklace, Amber, I said. The words tasted like bile. Is it new? Amber's hand flew to her throat. She stroked the pearls possessively, a smirk playing on her lips. She looked at Tevin, then back at me. Oh, this, she said lightly. Yes, it is a gift. Tevin surprised me with it this afternoon. He wanted to buy me something special to celebrate our new tax bracket. It is vintage, very rare. I looked at Tevin. He was staring at his plate, shoving a forkful of potato into his mouth to avoid speaking. Tevin bought that for you today, I asked, feigning awe. That is so generous, especially since he was so worried about his startup capital just yesterday. My father slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. Enough! Jasmine Harold barked. His face was red, his eyes narrowed behind his glasses. Why do you always have to question him? Why can't you just be happy for your brother? I am just asking, Dad, I said softly. It looks very expensive. Of course it is expensive, my father scoffed. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing at Tevin with a fork. That is what success looks like, Jasmine. Your brother is a visionary. He takes risks. He moves fast. You have always been a plodder, working your little corporate job, saving your pennies, buying insurance. And look where it got you. He took a large swig of wine and pointed a finger at me. You are 35 years old and you are homeless, Jasmine. You have nothing to show for your life but a burnt-out apartment and a suitcase full of regrets. Meanwhile, Tevin here has tripled his net worth in a week. He knows how to seize opportunity. You could learn a thing or two from him instead of standing there looking like a beggar. The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. He was lecturing me on finance while sitting in a house I was paying for, drinking wine I had bought, praising a son who had stolen his wealth from me. It was a masterpiece of ignorance. Linda walked over with the platter of crackers and slammed it down in front of me. Eat something, she said sharply. You look gaunt. And don't look at your father like that. He is right. We raised you to be smart, Jasmine, but you lack street smarts. You let yourself get comfortable. Tevin is hungry. That is why he wins. I looked at the crackers. I looked at the pearls. I looked at the three of them, comfortable and arrogant in their bubble of lies. You are right, Dad, I said. My voice was gaining strength, losing the tremor I had faked. I have been too comfortable. I have been playing by the rules my whole life. I thought that if I worked hard and loved my family, everything would work out. But I see now that I was wrong. Amber giggled. Well, at least you admit it. That is the first step to recovery. Maybe Tevin can hire you as his assistant. He is going to need someone to fetch his coffee. Tevin finally looked up, a nervous smile on his face. Yeah, Jazz. I could probably find a spot for you. Minimum wage, of course, until you prove yourself. The sheer audacity made me smile. It was a genuine smile, sharp and dangerous. Thank you for the offer, Tevin, I said. But I don't think I will need a job. I actually came here to give you something. My mother stopped chewing. Give us something, she asked suspiciously. I thought you said you were broke. I thought you lost everything in the fire. I did, I said. I lost the furniture. I lost the clothes. I lost the sentimental items I thought mattered. But I didn't lose everything. I managed to save one thing. And I brought it here tonight because I think it belongs to you. All of you. I reached into the large tote bag I had carried in. The room went quiet. For a second, I saw a flash of fear in Tevin's eyes. He was wondering if I had a gun. In a way I did. But mine was much more painful than a bullet. I pulled out the thick manila envelope Saul had given me. It landed on the heavy oak table with a dull, heavy thud that echoed in the silence. What is this? My father asked, squinting at the package. It is a gift, I said, pulling out the chair at the end of the table, the foot of the table opposite my father. I sat down, crossing my arms over my chest. I think of it as a severance package. Severance package? Amber asked, confused. For who? For the family, I said. Go ahead, Tevin, open it. Since you are the visionary of the family, you should be the first to see the future. Tevin hesitated. His hand shook as he reached for the envelope. He undid the metal clasp and slid the contents out onto the table. The first thing that slid out was not a document. It was a photograph. A high-resolution printed still from a night vision camera. It showed Amber holding a lighter to my curtains, her face illuminated by the flame. Tevin froze. His face went gray. Amber leaned over to look, and her wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Red wine splashed across the Persian rug my mother loved so much, looking like a spray of arterial blood. What is this? My mother whispered, staring at the photo. Keep looking, I said coldly. Tevin pulled out the next sheet. It was a foreclosure notice from Nemesis Holdings, LLC. And the next. A criminal complaint for grand larceny and arson. And the next. An eviction order effective in 30 days. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was dead. It was the vacuum of space where no one could hear you scream. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my father. You were right, Dad, I said softly. I have been a worker bee. I have been an auditor. And tonight, I am closing the books. I watched as the realization washed over them, a slow-moving tsunami that was about to destroy their entire world. And for the first time since the fire, I felt warm. I did not give them time to breathe. I did not give them time to concoct a lie about the photograph sitting on the table or to claim that it was photoshopped or out of context or a prank. I knew this family. I knew that their capacity for denial was infinite. If I showed them a smoking gun, they would claim it was a water pistol. If I showed them a body, they would claim it was sleeping. To break through the fortress of delusion they had built around Tevin, I needed something undeniable. I needed them to see the crime in motion. I raised my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, mirroring icon. The 70-inch smart television mounted above the stone fireplace, the one I had bought them for Christmas 2 years ago, so my father could watch football in high definition, was currently displaying a loop of abstract art. It was a serene, shifting image of floating geometric shapes. I tapped the screen. The abstract art vanished. The room blinked as the television went black for a split second, the connection loading. The silence in the dining room was so absolute that I could hear the hum of the hard drive spinning up. Tevin was staring at the TV, his mouth slightly open, a piece of roasted potato falling from his fork onto the expensive tablecloth. He looked like a deer caught not just in headlights, but in the crosshairs of a hunter's rifle. Then the video appeared. It was massive. The night vision footage from my hallway camera was blown up to cinematic proportions. The grainy green and black image loomed over the dinner table, turning the cozy, warm room into a cold surveillance chamber. On the screen, the timestamp ticked by. 1:25 a.m. We watched in silence as the digital versions of Tevin and Amber moved through my apartment. Seeing it on the small tablet in the coffee shop had been nauseating, but seeing it here in the sanctuary of my parents' home felt like an exorcism. The contrast was violent. Here were the real Tevin and Amber dressed in fine clothes, smelling of expensive perfume and cologne, sitting amidst crystal wine glasses. And there looming above them were their shadow selves skulking like rats in a sewer. The audio from the TV speakers was crisp. My parents flinched as they heard the sound of their own son's voice whispering in the dark. "We got the cash. We got the jewelry. Let's get out of here." My father turned slowly to look at Tevin. It was a mechanical movement like a rusted turret turning. His face had drained of all color, the flush of wine replaced by a sickly gray pallor. He didn't speak. He just stared at his son, then back at the screen. On the TV, Amber was pulling the lighter from her pocket. I watched Amber in real life. She was shaking. It started in her hands and spread to her shoulders until her entire body was vibrating. She wasn't looking at the TV. She was looking at the pearls around her neck. She was clawing at them, her fingers fumbling with the clasp as if the jewelry had suddenly turned into a noose. She scratched her skin, leaving angry red welts on her collarbone, trying to get the stolen evidence off her body. Then came the sound. The distinct, sharp click of the lighter ignition. On the screen, the flame flared up, illuminating Amber's face with a demonic glow. "Not our problem," the digital Amber said. The words echoed off the vaulted ceiling of the dining room. "Not our problem. Not our problem. Not our problem." In the video, the curtains caught fire. The orange glow spread rapidly, eating the fabric, climbing toward the ceiling. The camera captured the smoke beginning to swirl, the terrifying beauty of destruction. I paused the video right there. I froze the frame on the fire. I wanted that image burned into their retinas. I wanted them to eat their dinner by the light of my burning home. I lowered my phone and looked at them. "Well," I said, my voice cutting through the thick atmosphere. "I guess you were right, Dad. Tevin really does know how to seize an opportunity." For a moment, nobody moved. It was a tableau of horror. Then the dam broke. Tevin made a sound that was half scream, half sob. He stood up so abruptly that his heavy oak chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor with a deafening bang. He didn't look at me. He looked at the TV, his eyes wild, his chest heaving. Panic had stripped away his veneer of sophistication. He was just a cornered animal now. "You illegal recorded me," he shouted, his voice cracking. "That is illegal. You can't do that. That is a violation of privacy." I stayed seated, calm and unmoving. Actually, Tevin, Illinois is a two-party consent state for audio, but there is an exception when the recording captures the commission of a violent felony. And arson is definitely a violent felony. "Shut up!" he screamed. He grabbed the empty wine bottle from the table. He held it by the neck, swinging it like a club. He looked deranged. He looked dangerous. "Give me the phone, Jasmine." "Delete it. Delete it right now, or I swear to God I will kill you." He lunged. He didn't come around the table. He scrambled onto it. He climbed right over the roast chicken and the silver platter, kicking plates aside, wine glasses shattering under his expensive shoes. He was coming straight for me, the bottle raised high, his face twisted into a mask of pure murderous rage. My mother screamed. Not at him. She screamed at me. "Jasmine, run." But I didn't run. I didn't flinch. I had spent my life running from them, running to please them, running to fix their mistakes. I was done running. As Tevin lunged across the centerpiece, I reached into the pocket of my gray tracksuit. My hand closed around the cold metal canister of the saber red pepper gel I had purchased 3 hours ago at a tactical supply store. I didn't hesitate. I didn't warn him. I raised my arm, aimed for the center of his face, and depressed the trigger. The stream of thick orange gel hit him mid-air. It plastered across his eyes, his nose, his open, screaming mouth. Tevin didn't even have time to process what had happened. The effects were instantaneous. He gagged, a wet, choking sound, and his momentum carried him forward until he crashed off the table and onto the floor at my feet. He landed hard, writhing in agony, clawing at his face. The wine bottle rolled away harmlessly across the rug. My eyes, he shrieked a high-pitched wail of pain. "I can't see, it burns. Help me, Mom." The room descended into chaos. The smell of the pepper spray, sharp and chemical, mixed with the smell of the spilled wine and food. Amber was under the table, curled into a fetal position, sobbing hysterically. "I didn't do it. He made me. He said we needed the money." And then there was my mother. Linda didn't rush to check if I was okay. She didn't ask if I was hurt by the brother who had just tried to bash my head in with a bottle. She scrambled out of her chair and fell to her knees beside Tevin. She pulled his head into her lap, heedless of the orange gel smearing onto her expensive dress. "You monster!" she screamed at me, her face contorted with hatred. "Look what you did to him, you blinded him. Get water, Harold. Get water." My father was standing frozen, staring at his son rolling on the floor. He looked old. He looked broken. But he moved to the kitchen, obedient as always to my mother's commands. "Mom," I said, standing up and taking a step back to ensure I was out of reach. "He just tried to assault me. He just admitted to burning down my apartment." "I don't care," Linda shrieked, rocking Tevin back and forth like he was a baby. "He is your brother. He made a mistake. It was just a mistake, Jasmine. He was desperate. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. A mistake," I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. "Arson is not a mistake, Mom. Breaking and entering is not a mistake. Stealing my grandmother's pearls is not a mistake. It is a choice. A deliberate, evil choice. He is under pressure," she yelled back, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand because you have never had to struggle. You have everything handed to you. He just needed a little help. And you were too selfish to give it to him. So he had to take it. This is your fault. If you had just loaned him the money, none of this would have happened." I stared at her. I really stared at her. There it was, the naked, ugly truth. In her mind, I was the villain. I was the villain for having money. I was the villain for not letting them drain me dry. I was the villain for surviving. She was wiping the gel from Tevin's eyes with her napkin, cooing to him. "It is okay, baby. Mommy is here. We will fix this. We will get a lawyer. We will tell them it was an accident." "It is not going to work, Mom," I said coldly. "You shut your mouth," she spat at me. "You are going to delete that video. You are going to tell the police you lost your phone. You are going to fix this, Jasmine. Or so help me God, you are no daughter of mine." I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I felt a severance in my soul, cleaner and sharper than a surgical blade. "I am not your daughter," I agreed softly. "I am just the victim, and you are the accomplice." Suddenly, a new sound cut through the hysteria in the room. It started faint, a low wail in the distance, but it grew louder rapidly. Sirens, not one, many. A chorus of wailing banshees closing in on Oakwood Lane. My father dropped the glass of water he was holding. It shattered on the kitchen tiles. "What is that?" he whispered. Blue and red lights began to flash against the dining room window, pulsing in time with the sirens. They washed over the room, painting us all in the colors of the law. The lights danced across the frozen image of the fire on the TV screen. "You called them," my mother whispered, looking up at me with horror. "You called the police on your own brother." I checked my watch. 7:42 p.m. They were right on time. "I didn't call them on my brother," I said, looking down at Tevin, who was still moaning on the floor. "I called them on a criminal." The front door burst open. I had left it unlocked. "Police! Show me your hands!" Heavy voices shouted from the foyer, the sound of boots thundering on the hardwood floor. The floor I had paid to refinish filled the house. I stepped back, raising my hands slowly in the air. I looked at Amber shivering under the table. I looked at Tevin, blinded and weeping. I looked at my parents, their faces masks of betrayal. The show was over. The reality was about to begin. In here, I called out to the officers. The evidence is on the screen. As the uniformed officers swarmed into the dining room, weapons drawn, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, a weight I had carried since childhood, finally being lifted off my shoulders and placed exactly where it belonged. The dining room of my parents' house had always been a place of strict decorum. It was where we were told to sit up straight, keep our elbows off the table, and pretend that we were the perfect God-fearing family that my father projected to the community. Now, it looked like a war zone. The antique table was askew, covered in wine and broken glass. My brother was writhing on the floor, clawing at his burning eyes. My sister-in-law was cowering under the table like a frightened dog. And standing in the doorway, filling the frame with the imposing bulk of a trench coat and a badge, was Detective Vance. He didn't come alone. Two uniformed officers flanked him, their hands resting on their holsters, their eyes scanning the chaotic scene with the practiced detachment of men who had seen far worse domestic disputes than this. But this wasn't just a dispute. This was a crime scene. Vance stepped into the room. He didn't look at my parents. He didn't look at the spilled food. His eyes locked onto me first, a brief nod of acknowledgement, before shifting to the man screaming on the floor, "Tevin Williams?" Vance said, his voice booming over Tevin's wails. "You are under arrest for first-degree arson, grand larceny, and conspiracy." Tevin didn't seem to hear him. He was too busy rubbing the pepper gel into his own eyes, making the burn worse. My mother, Linda, was still on her knees beside him, trying to shield him with her body, as if her embrace could stop the law. "He is hurt," she screamed at Vance. "Can't you see he is hurt? My daughter blinded him. You should be arresting her. She attacked him." Vance ignored her completely. He signaled to the officers, "Get him up." The two officers moved forward. They were not gentle. They reached down, gripping Tevin by the arms, and hauled him to his feet. Tevin's legs were jelly. He slumped against them, his face a mask of orange slime and snot. "Mom," Tevin shrieked, the sound tearing through the room. "Mom, don't let them take me. I didn't mean to do it. It hurts. Make them stop." It was pathetic. A 30-year-old man, a self-proclaimed visionary and entrepreneur, crying for his mommy because he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. One of the officers spun Tevin around and slammed him against the wall, forcing his hands behind his back. The metallic ratchet of the handcuffs echoed through the room, click, click, click. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It sounded like closure. Under the table, Amber let out a high-pitched yelp as the second officer grabbed her ankle and dragged her out. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive dress stained with wine and floor dust. She looked wild, her hair coming loose from its perfect ponytail. "Don't touch me!" she yelled, trying to jerk her arm away. "I didn't do anything. It was him. It was all him." She pointed a shaking finger at Tevin, who was currently being read his Miranda rights against the wall. "He made me do it," Amber cried, her eyes darting around the room looking for anyone who would believe her. "He said he owed money to bad people. He said they were going to kill him. I told him we shouldn't go to the apartment, but he forced me. He said it was just going to be a small fire. I am a victim here." I watched her, marveling at the speed of her betrayal. 10 minutes ago, she was wearing my grandmother's pearls and drinking my wine, smug in her complicity. Now she was ready to send her husband up the river to save her own skin. "Liar," Tevin shouted, spitting orange gel onto the wallpaper. "You lit the curtain. You were the one who brought the lighter, Mom. Tell them. Tell them Amber is lying." My mother was standing in the middle of the room, turning in circles, her hands pulling at her hair. She looked completely unmoored. Her golden boy was in cuffs. Her perfect daughter-in-law was snitching. Her world was collapsing. "Officers, please, this is a misunderstanding," my father Harold finally spoke up. He stepped forward, trying to summon the authority he used on his subordinates at the bank. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his glasses. "These are good kids. They have never been in trouble. We can sort this out as a family. There is no need for handcuffs." Vance turned to my father. He looked him up and down with cold disdain. Sir, your son just confessed to a felony in front of 3 police officers. And we have video evidence of him setting fire to an inhabited high-rise building. This isn't a family dispute. This is the state of Illinois versus Tevin and Amber Williams. He nodded to the officers. Take them out. As they began to march Tevin and Amber toward the door, the reality finally hit my father. He realized that his authority meant nothing here. He realized that he couldn't talk his way out of this. And in that moment of powerlessness, he turned his rage on the only target he had ever been able to control, me. He lunged across the room, placing himself between the officers and the front door, blocking their exit. He wasn't looking at the police, though. He was looking at me. His face was purple with fury, a vein bulging in his neck. "Jasmine," he roared. "Stop this." Right now, I stood my ground, clutching the empty canister of pepper spray. "Stop what, Dad? Justice. Stop this nonsense. Tell them to let your brother go. Tell them you made a mistake." I stared at him, incredulous. He wanted me to lie to the police. He wanted me to obstruct justice. "I can't do that, Dad," I said calmly. "I didn't arrest them. The evidence did." "You ungrateful little witch!" he shouted, shaking a finger in my face. "He is your brother. He is your flesh and blood. So he made a mistake. So he took some money. You have plenty. You have so much you don't even know what to do with it. And now you are going to send him to prison. For what? For some furniture and clothes." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You are the older sister, Jasmine. It is your job to look out for him. It is your job to protect this family. Instead, you are tearing it apart because of your ego." "I am tearing it apart," I asked, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He burned my home, Dad. He could have killed people. But nobody died," Harold yelled, throwing his hands up. "Nobody died, Jasmine. It is just property, and you have insurance." The words hung in the air. Insurance. That was it. That was the sum total of his morality. It didn't matter that his son was a criminal. It didn't matter that his daughter had been homeless for 24 hours. All that mattered was that the check would clear. "You have a deluxe policy," he continued, pressing his advantage, thinking he had found the logic that would sway me. "I saw the paperwork when you bought the place. State Farm will cut you a check for everything. You will get brand new furniture. You will get a brand new apartment. You won't lose a dime. So why are you doing this? Why are you ruining your brother's life when you are going to get paid anyway? Withdraw the complaint, Jasmine. Tell them it was an accident. Collect the insurance money and help your brother pay off his debts. That is what a good sister would do." My mother looked up, seizing on this lifeline. "Yes. Yes, Jasmine. Listen to your father. The insurance pays for everything. You don't lose anything. Just drop the charges and we can all go back to normal." I looked at them. I looked at the desperation in their eyes. They truly believed this. They truly believed that because I was insured, the crime didn't count. They believed that my trauma was a commodity that could be traded for Tevin's freedom. I walked over to where my father was blocking the door. I signaled the officers to wait a moment. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted to make sure he understood exactly why his plan was doomed. "Dad," I said, my voice low and lethal, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You worked in banking, but clearly you never read the fine print on an insurance policy." I took a step closer, invading his personal space for the first time in my life. "Insurance covers accidents, Dad. It covers acts of God. It covers negligence. Do you know what it does not cover?" He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "It does not cover intentional acts caused by the policyholder or anyone the policyholder entrusted with access to the property," I said, enunciating every syllable. I pointed to my mother. "I gave Mom the key. Legally, I entrusted her with access. She gave the key to Tevin. When Tevin used that key to enter and deliberately set a fire, he voided the policy." My father's face went slack. "That means," I continued, my voice hard as diamonds, "the insurance company isn't going to pay me a single cent. They are going to deny the claim based on the fraud exclusion clause. I am not getting a check, Dad. I am eating the loss. All $500,000 of it. No, my mother whispered. That can't be true. It is true, I said. And do you know what else happens when you file a fraudulent claim for a fire set by a family member? The insurance company doesn't just deny you, they sue you. If I lie for Tevin, if I say it was an accident, I become a co-conspirator to insurance fraud. I would go to prison with him. I looked my father dead in the eye. You are asking me to commit a felony to save the son who robbed me. You are asking me to go to jail so Tevin can walk free. That is what you are asking, isn't it? Harold didn't answer. He couldn't. The math had finally hit him. He realized that the money spigot was turned off. But don't worry, Dad, I said, a cruel smile touching my lips. I figured out another way to get my money back. Since the insurance won't pay, I have to recover the damages from the assets of the responsible parties. I gestured around the room, to the high ceilings, the expensive furniture, the life they loved so much. That is why I bought your mortgage, I whispered. What? He breathed. I bought the note, Dad. I am foreclosing. I am going to sell this house to pay for the apartment Tevin burned down. I turned to Detective Vance. Get them out of here, Detective. They are trespassing on my property. Vance nodded, a hint of a smile on his face. You heard the lady. Move. The officers shoved past my stunned father, dragging a weeping Tevin and a screaming Amber out the front door and into the flashing blue lights of the night. My parents stood in the wreckage of their dining room, surrounded by the smell of pepper spray and ruin, realizing too late that they had bet on the wrong child. The rain in Chicago has a way of stripping the city down to its bones, washing away the grime and leaving only the hard gray steel underneath. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my temporary corporate apartment, watching the storm batter the skyline. It had been 7 days since the fire. 7 days since I watched my brother be dragged out of my parents' dining room in handcuffs. 7 days since I became the villain in the family narrative. I wasn't staying in a motel anymore. My company, realizing the severity of the situation and unwilling to lose their top risk auditor during a chaotic fiscal quarter, had moved me into a fully furnished executive suite in the Loop. It was sterile beige and smelled of lemon polish, but it was safe. It had 24-hour security, and most importantly, no one in my family had a key. But they did have the address. I had given it to them, not because I wanted to see them, but because in the world of auditing, you never close a file until the final exit interview is conducted. The buzzer rang at 7:00 p.m. sharp. I pressed the intercom button. Send them up. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize the two people standing in the hallway. My father, Harold, usually a man who wore his arrogance like a suit of armor, looked deflated. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes bloodshot, and his raincoat hung loosely on his frame. My mother, Linda, looked even worse. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was clutching her purse to her chest as if she expected me to snatch it. They stepped inside without greeting me. They didn't comment on the luxury of the apartment or ask how I was coping with the trauma of losing my home. They brought the storm in with them, a cold, damp energy of desperation. We need to talk, Jasmine, my father said, his voice raspy. I gestured to the beige sofa. Have a seat. Can I get you water? No, Linda snapped, finding her voice. We don't want your water. We want you to fix this. Do you know what has happened to your brother? Do you have any idea? I sat in the armchair opposite them, keeping a coffee table between us. I assumed he was arraigned, I said calmly. I assumed the judge set bail. Bail. My father let out a bitter, jagged laugh. He began to pace the small living room, leaving wet footprints on the carpet. The judge denied bail, Jasmine. Denied it. Because he pointed a shaking finger at me, because you provided the prosecutor with evidence suggesting he was a flight risk. You showed them the transfer to the Cayman Islands. He was trying to move stolen money offshore, Dad, I said. That is the definition of a flight risk. He is terrified, Linda wailed. I visited him yesterday. He is in general population. He has a black eye. He is crying himself to sleep. He is your little brother and you threw him to the wolves. I didn't throw him to the wolves, Mom. I just stopped feeding him. Harold stopped pacing and leaned over the table, placing his hands on the glass. Look, we didn't come here to argue about the past. We came here to make a deal. We need money for a defense attorney. The public defender is a joke. He wants Tevin to plead guilty to a lesser charge. We need a real lawyer, a shark. And real lawyers cost money. I stared at him. The audacity was almost impressive. They were asking the victim to fund the defense of the perpetrator. And let me guess, I said dryly. You don't have the liquid cash because Tevin lost it all in crypto, and your credit is shot because you have been living beyond your means for decades. So you came to the Bank of Jasmine. It is a loan, Harold insisted, though his eyes shifted away from mine. We will pay you back. We just need 50,000 for the retainer. Once Tevin is out, he can get back on his feet. He has ideas. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. I looked at these two people who had prioritized their image over my safety, who had enabled a criminal until he burned down my life. I am afraid I can't give you a loan, Dad, I said. You mean you won't? Linda spat. No, I mean I can't, I corrected her, because I already spent my liquidity. I made a very large investment last week. Investment. Harold looked at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. Your house burned down, your brother is in jail, and you are making investments. I am a risk auditor, Dad. When I see a liability, I neutralize it, and when I see an opportunity, I take it. I reached under the coffee table and pulled out a thin black folder. I slid it across the glass toward them. Open it. Harold hesitated just like Tevin had at the dinner table. He opened the folder. Inside was a single document with a blue cover sheet. He squinted at the legal jargon, his lips moving silently as he read the title. Assignment of mortgage note, he read aloud. Transfer of lien rights to Nemesis Holdings, LLC. He looked up confused. What is this? This is the mortgage on our house. Why do you have this? Because I own it, I said. The room went silent, save for the sound of the rain lashing against the glass. I don't understand, Linda said, her voice trembling. The bank owns our mortgage. We pay the bank. You haven't paid the bank in 4 months, Mom, I said. You are in default. The bank classifies your loan as a toxic asset. They were preparing to foreclose, but they were happy to sell the note to a private investor for a lump sum cash payment. That investor is Nemesis Holdings, LLC. And I am the sole proprietor of Nemesis Holdings. Harold dropped the paper as if it burned his fingers. You bought our debt. I bought the power to decide your future, I said. But why? Harold stammered, his face pale. Why would you do that? To save us. To stop the bank from taking the house. I looked at him with a pity that was colder than hate. No, Dad. I didn't do it to save you. I did it to evict you. Evict us, Linda screamed, jumping to her feet. You can't do that. That is our home. We have lived there for 20 years. You can't just kick your parents out on the street. Actually, I can, I said, keeping my voice level. And I don't even have to wait for the usual foreclosure timeline. You see, Dad, you always told me to read the fine print. So I did. I pointed to the document. Paragraph 14, Section C. The acceleration clause regarding illegal activity. It states that if the property is used for the commission of a felony or used to store the proceeds of illegal activity, the lender has the right to demand immediate repayment of the entire principal balance. If the borrower cannot pay, the lender can take possession of the property immediately to secure the asset. I watched the blood drain from my father's face as the logic closed around him like a trap. Tevin used your house as a base of operations, I explained. He brought the stolen cash there. He brought my grandmother's stolen pearls there. The police found them in his bedroom. That means your house was used to store stolen goods. That is a violation of the mortgage contract. So I continued, leaning forward. Unless you have $340,000 in cash right now to pay off the balance of the loan, Nemesis Holdings is exercising its right to seize the property. You are bluffing, Harold whispered. No judge would sign off on that. The judge already signed it this morning, I said. It is an emergency order to protect the collateral. You have served as accessories to a crime, Dad. The law doesn't look kindly on that. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city. You told me insurance would cover my loss. Remember, I asked, not turning around to face them. You told me it wasn't a big deal because the insurance company would write me a check. But we established that was a lie. The insurance company denied my claim yesterday because the fire was arson committed by a family member. I turned back to face them. So I am out $500,000. My apartment, my furniture, my clothes, my peace of mind. Someone has to pay for that, Dad. That is how the world works. Restitution. You are taking our house to pay for your apartment, Linda sobbed, sinking back onto the sofa. You are leaving us with nothing. You left me with nothing, I shouted, my voice finally breaking the calm surface. You left me on a sidewalk in my pajamas. You told me it wasn't your problem. Well, guess what? Now your housing situation is not my problem. Harold stood up, his legs shaking. Jasmine, please. We are your parents. We are old. Where will we go? We have no savings. Tevin took it all. I looked at them. I searched for a shred of guilt, a shred of hesitation. But all I saw were the people who had watched me drown for years while holding a life raft for my brother. I suggest you call Tevin's lawyer, I said. Maybe the public defender knows a shelter, or maybe you can find a rental, but you have 7 days to vacate the premises. I have a crew coming next Monday to clear the place out. I am putting it on the market to recoup my losses. You are evil, Linda hissed, staring at me with pure hatred. You are a cold, heartless witch. I walked to the door and held it open. I am just a risk auditor, Mom, I said. And I just closed the biggest liability in my portfolio. They walked out. They didn't look back. They walked slowly, like people carrying a heavy burden. And they were. They were carrying the weight of 30 years of favoritism, 30 years of neglect, and the crushing realization that the daughter they had thrown away was the only one who could have saved them. I closed the door and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed in the quiet apartment. I was alone. I was tired. But for the first time in my life, I was free. I went back to the window and watched the rain. The storm was still raging outside, but inside the air was clear. I picked up my phone and dialed Saul. It is done, I said. Proceed with the eviction. Copy that, Saul said. Are you okay, Jasmine? I looked at my reflection in the glass. I am better than okay, Saul. I am solvent. The Cook County Criminal Courthouse is a building designed to intimidate. It is a monolith of stone and glass that smells of floor wax, stale coffee, and the quiet, desperate prayers of people who know they have run out of options. As I walked down the long corridor toward courtroom 302, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor felt like a metronome counting down the final moments of my family's old life. I was not there as a sister. I was not there as a daughter. I was there as the primary witness for the prosecution. I wore a navy blue suit, sharp and tailored, the kind of armor I wore when I had to deliver bad news to a board of directors. My hair was pulled back. My face was scrubbed clean of emotion. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick and heavy. The gallery was packed. My parents were there, of course. They sat in the front row behind the defense table. My father, Harold, looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. His suit hung loosely on his frame and his face was gray. My mother, Linda, was clutching a rosary, her lips moving in a frantic, silent rhythm. When she saw me enter, she stopped praying. She didn't look at me with love. She looked at me with the kind of terrified repulsion one might feel toward an executioner. I took my seat behind the prosecutor. I didn't look at the defendant's table immediately, but I could feel their presence. It was a physical weight. Finally, I turned my head. Tevin sat slumped in his chair wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his complexion. The swelling from the pepper spray had gone down, but his eyes were bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. He looked small. The swagger of the crypto visionary was gone, replaced by the trembling fear of a boy who had never been told no. Beside him, Amber looked brittle. Her roots were showing a stark line of dark brown against the artificial blonde, a visual timeline of her incarceration. She was weeping softly, a constant grating sound that filled the room. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Judge Harrison entered. He was a stern man with a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to violent crimes in residential buildings. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the docket. The trial had moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The video footage I had provided was damning, and the forensic accounting trail I had uncovered left no room for doubt regarding the motive. Today was not about proving guilt, it was about sentencing. But first I had to testify to the impact of the crime. I was called to the stand. I walked up the 3 steps, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. Ms. Williams, the prosecutor, began. Can you describe your relationship with the defendant, Tevin Williams? He is my younger brother, I said. My voice was steady. It didn't waver. And did you at any point give him permission to enter your apartment on the night of November 14th? No. Did you give him permission to remove the safe containing $200,000 and your grandmother's jewelry? No. Did you give him permission to disable the smoke detectors and ignite the curtains in your living room? No. The prosecutor nodded. Ms. Williams, how has this event impacted your life? I looked at Tevin. He was staring at his hands, refusing to meet my gaze. I lost my home, I stated simply. I lost my sense of safety. But more importantly, I lost the illusion that shared DNA guarantees loyalty. My brother and his wife didn't just destroy property, they endangered the lives of 300 other residents in my building to cover up a theft. They calculated that my life was worth less than their debt. Objection, the defense attorney shouted, standing up. He was a court-appointed lawyer who looked exhausted. The witness is speculating on the defendant's state of mind. Overruled, the judge said calmly. The witness is stating the facts as she experienced them. Continue, Ms. Williams. I didn't have anything else to add. The facts spoke for themselves. Then it was the defense's turn. The lawyer tried to rattle me. He tried to paint me as the vindictive wealthy sister who could have easily bailed her brother out, but chose to prosecute instead. Ms. Williams, he asked, leaning on the podium, you are a professional risk auditor, correct? You are a wealthy woman. Is it not true that the financial loss you suffered was negligible compared to your net worth? Is it not true that you could have resolved this privately within the family? I looked at him. It was the same argument my father had used. The argument that my success made me a target who wasn't allowed to complain when she was robbed. Theft is not a family matter, I said coldly, and arson is not a private dispute. If a stranger had done this, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The fact that he is my brother makes it worse, not better. It means the betrayal was personal. The lawyer frowned. But you recorded them. You set a trap. I didn't set a trap. I corrected him. I installed security cameras. They walked into the trap of their own greed. I stepped down from the stand. I didn't look at my parents as I walked back to my seat. I couldn't. I knew that if I looked at them, I might see a flicker of the people they used to be, and I couldn't afford that weakness right now. The judge called for the defendants to stand. Tevin stood up, his legs shaking so hard the chains around his ankles rattled. Amber stood up beside him, clutching his arm. Tevin Williams. The judge said, his voice filling the room. You have pleaded guilty to 1 count of first-degree arson, 1 count of grand larceny, and 1 count of reckless endangerment. The court has reviewed the evidence. This was not a crime of passion. It was a premeditated act of destruction designed to conceal a theft. You risked the lives of hundreds of people to hide your own financial irresponsibility. Tevin began to sob. I am sorry, Your Honor. I am so sorry, please. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. The judge ignored him. The court sentences you to 15 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will not be eligible for parole until you have served 85% of your sentence. 15 years. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. 15 years meant Tevin would be 45 when he got out. His youth, his potential, his arrogance. It was all gone. Amber Williams, the judge, continued. You have pleaded guilty to conspiracy and accomplice to arson. You provided the means, the lighter, and you actively participated in the destruction of evidence. You are sentenced to 10 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. 10 years. The scream that tore through the courtroom didn't come from Amber. It came from the gallery. It was a primal, animalistic sound. My mother. Linda stood up, her hands clutching her chest. Not my baby, she shrieked. No, you can't take him. He is a good boy. He is a good boy. She lunged forward, trying to climb over the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. Two bailiffs moved instantly, blocking her path. Ma'am, sit down, one of them shouted. He is innocent. It is her fault she did this, Linda screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is the devil. She put him there. Jasmine, tell them to let him go. I sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around. Then the sound of a body hitting the floor. My mother had collapsed. The stress, the grief, the sheer horror of seeing her golden child condemned had been too much. She lay in the aisle, gasping for air, her face pale as wax. Linda, my father shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. Help someone, help her! The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Paramedics were called. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. Tevin was screaming for his mother as the bailiffs dragged him toward the side door that led to the holding cells. Amber was being led away in the opposite direction, her legs dragging on the floor. Amidst the noise and the confusion, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned my head slowly. My father was kneeling on the floor, holding my mother's hand. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. His eyes were filled with a hatred so pure, so concentrated, it felt like a physical blow. It wasn't the anger of a parent who was disappointed. It was the hatred of a man who had lost everything and knew exactly who to blame. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was a monster. In that look, the final thread that connected us snapped. There was no going back. There would be no reconciliation, no holiday dinners, no awkward phone calls. The family was dead. I had killed it to save myself. I held his gaze for a second, then I turned away. I stood up, smoothed the front of my navy blue suit, and picked up my purse. I walked toward the exit. I walked past the paramedics working on my mother. I walked past my father, who was now weeping over her. I walked past the gallery full of strangers whispering and pointing. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out into the hallway. The press was waiting. The story of the wealthy risk auditor whose brother burned down her luxury apartment had been catnip for the local news. Cameras flashed as soon as I emerged. Microphones were thrust in my face. Ms. Williams, are you happy with the verdict? Do you have any comment on your mother's collapse? Is it true you evicted your parents from their home? Ms. Williams, do you feel any guilt? I didn't slow down. I put on my large black sunglasses, shielding my eyes from the glare. I kept my face neutral, my chin high. I moved through the sea of reporters like a shark moving through water, silent, efficient, and dangerous. I walked out the front doors of the courthouse and down the wide stone steps. The sun was shining. It was a crisp, cold Chicago day. The air tasted clean. At the curb, a black town car was waiting. The driver, a man I had hired for his discretion, stepped out and opened the rear door. Ms. Williams, he said, nodding respectfully. Thank you, James, I said. I slid into the leather seat. It was quiet inside. The tinted windows blocked out the screaming reporters and the chaos of the courthouse. I watched them through the glass, distorted and mute. "Where to, ma'am?" James asked, looking at me in the rearview mirror. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. I thought about the empty space where my family used to be. It was vast. It was terrifying. But it was also full of possibility. I was 35 years old. I was debt-free. I was burden-free. "Take me to the airport, James," I said. "The airport. You have a flight." "No," I said, opening my eyes and looking at the skyline. "But I have enough frequent flyer miles to go anywhere I want. And for the first time in my life, I don't have to ask anyone for permission." Drive. 6 months later, the view from the 45th floor of the St. Regis was very different from the view I used to have. My old apartment had looked out over the dense, tangled streets of the Loop, a constant reminder of the chaotic grind of the city. My new penthouse looked out over the lake. It was a vast, uninterrupted expanse of blue water that stretched all the way to the horizon, calm and cold and indifferent. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet that cost millions of dollars. The kind of quiet that couldn't be broken by a key turning in a lock because there were no keys. Everything in my new life was biometric. My fingerprint opened the front door, my retinal scan opened the safe. My voice activated the lights. It was a fortress of solitude built on the ashes of my old life, and for the first time in 35 years I didn't feel lonely. I felt secure. I sat on the white leather sofa in my living room, a glass of Sancerre in my hand. The furniture was new, sharp-edged and modern. There were no heavy curtains here, only motorized solar shades that descended with a silent hum. There were no Persian rugs to worry about staining. It was a space designed for one person, optimized for efficiency and peace. On the glass coffee table in front of me sat a single object that didn't belong. It was a cream-colored envelope. It had arrived at my office that morning, bypassed the mailroom screening, because it was marked personal and confidential in red ink. My assistant had handed it to me with a worried look, recognizing the handwriting. I had recognized it too. It was the frantic looping script of my mother, Linda. I hadn't opened it at work. I didn't want their energy contaminating the space where I made my money. I had brought it home, treating it like a hazardous material. Now, with the sun setting over the water, turning the sky a bruised purple, I finally picked it up. The envelope felt light, cheap. The paper was thin, not the heavy cardstock my mother used to pride herself on using for thank you notes. It smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and that specific cloying floral perfume she had worn since I was a child, a scent that used to mean comfort but now triggered a phantom itch in my throat like smoke inhalation. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. There was a single sheet of lined notebook paper inside. Jasmine. It began. I took a sip of wine and started to read. "I hope you are happy. I hope your fancy new apartment is warm, because where your father and I are sleeping tonight, there is a draft that chills you to the bone. We are living in a short-stay motel on the outskirts of Cicero. It is the only place that would take us with our credit ruined. The foreclosure is on our record now. No landlord will touch us. Your father is drinking again. He cries at night, Jasmine. He cries for the home he built with his own hands, the home you stole from him." I paused, analyzing the sentence structure. The home he built, the home I stole. Even now, stripped of everything, the narrative hadn't changed. They were the victims. I was the thief. The letter continued. "I went to see Tevin yesterday. It broke my heart. He has lost 20 pounds. He is terrified, Jasmine. He is a boy surrounded by hardened criminals. He asks about you every time I visit. He asks why his big sister hates him so much. I don't know what to tell him. I don't know how to explain that the girl I raised, the girl I taught to pray, has turned into stone." I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. She taught me to pray, yes. She taught me to pray for forgiveness while she sinned. She taught me to pray for abundance while she stole. We are family, Jasmine. The letter became more erratic here, the handwriting slanting downward. Blood is thicker than water. You can't change that. We made mistakes, yes. Tevin made a mistake. But he is your flesh and blood. And we are your parents. Does that mean nothing to you? Does the Bible mean nothing to you? Honor thy father and thy mother. You have dishonored us, and look where it has gotten us. We are destitute. Here it comes, I thought. The ask. We need help. We are not asking for a mansion. We just need enough to get a small apartment, a clean start, $5,000. That is nothing to you. You probably spend that on shoes. Please, Jasmine, be the bigger person. Show us that you still have a heart. If you send the money, we can start to forgive you. We can try to be a family again. We are willing to overlook what you did to Tevin if you help us now. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that echoed off the glass walls. They were willing to overlook what I did. They were offering me the privilege of buying their forgiveness for $5,000. It was breathtaking. It was a masterclass in narcissism. Even in the gutter, they believed they were sitting on a throne dispensing grace to the peasant who had wronged them. I put the letter down. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt validated. For the last 6 months, in the quiet moments between meetings or late at night, a tiny voice had whispered to me, was I too harsh? Was 15 years too long? Was taking the house too vindictive? But reading this letter silenced that voice forever. Because this letter proved that they hadn't learned a thing. They didn't regret the arson. They didn't regret the theft. They only regretted that they had been caught and that I had stopped paying. If I gave them $5,000 today, they would be back next month asking for 10. They would be back in 6 months asking me to pay for Tevin's appeal. It would never end. The only way to win a game against a parasite is to starve it. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling glass doors that opened onto the balcony. I slid the door open and stepped out. The wind was strong up here, whipping my hair across my face. It was cold, but it felt clean. I held the letter in my left hand. In my right hand, I held a silver Zippo lighter. I didn't smoke, but I had bought this lighter the day after the trial. I liked the weight of it. I liked the sound it made when it snapped open. It was a reminder that fire wasn't just a tool of destruction. It was a tool of purification. I flicked the wheel. The flame jumped up, dancing in the wind, struggling to stay alive against the gale. I cupped my hand around it, protecting it. I looked at the handwriting one last time. We are willing to overlook what you did. I touched the flame to the corner of the notebook paper. It didn't catch immediately. The wind tried to blow it out, but I held it steady. The paper browned, then curled, then burst into a small, bright orange flame. I watched the fire eat the words. I watched honor thy father turn to ash. I watched $5,000 crumble into black flakes. I watched family disappear. The heat pricked my fingers, but I didn't let go until the very last second. I held it until the fire had consumed every lie, every manipulation, every guilt trip. When the flame reached my fingertips, I opened my hand and let the wind take it. The ashes swirled away, instantly caught in the updraft of the skyscraper, disappearing into the vast, dark night over Lake Michigan. They were gone. Just like the debt. Just like the obligation. I stood there for a long time, watching the city lights twinkle below me. I thought about the concept of family. Growing up, I was taught that family was a fortress you defended at all costs. But I had learned the hard way that sometimes the enemies are inside the walls. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who bleed you dry. I thought about Detective Vance, who had checked on me every week since the fire, just to see how I was doing. I thought about Saul Cohen, who had fought for me like a pit bull. I thought about my assistant, who had screened my calls and brought me coffee when I was shaking from panic attacks. They were my fortress now. They were the people who respected me, who protected me, who asked for nothing but my friendship. The letter was gone. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was incinerated. I snapped the Zippo shut. The sound was final. Click. I turned around and walked back inside my beautiful, secure, silent home. I locked the balcony door. I picked up my wine glass. I walked to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. I had a busy day tomorrow. I was auditing a new client, a Fortune 500 company that suspected an internal leak. I smiled. I was good at finding leaks. I was good at cutting losses. I took a sip of wine. It tasted sweet. Rest in peace, Mom and Dad, I whispered to the empty room. And then I went to bed, and for the first time in my life, I slept without dreaming of fire. They say that forest fires are necessary for the health of the ecosystem. The heat clears away the dead brush, the rotting wood, and the invasive species that choke out the light. It is a violent, terrifying process, but when the smoke clears, the soil is richer, and the sunlight can finally reach the ground to let something new and strong take root. Looking back at the smoke rising from my old apartment building that night, I thought it was the end of my world. In reality, it was the spark of my liberation. If Tevin hadn't burned down my sanctuary, I would have stayed in the trap forever. I would have kept writing checks. I would have kept swallowing the insults at Sunday dinners. I would have kept trying to buy the love of people who viewed me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. The fire didn't just take my things, it burned away my denial. It forced me to see the charred, ugly truth that had been hiding beneath the surface of my family for decades. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this: financial independence is the only true freedom. As women, and especially as women of color, we are often taught that our value lies in how much we can give, how much we can support, and how much we can endure for the sake of others. We are taught that being the strong one means carrying the dead weight of everyone else on our shoulders. I am here to tell you that is a lie. Being strong means knowing when to put the weight down. Being strong means realizing that you cannot save people who are determined to drown, especially when they are trying to use you as their life raft. My money was my shield. My knowledge of the law was my sword. If I hadn't spent those years building my career, if I hadn't saved, if I hadn't understood how debt and property rights worked, I would have been helpless. I would have been another victim crying in a motel room while my brother walked free and my parents enabled him. Do not let anyone, not even your parents, guilt you into financial ruin. Do not let them use the word family as a weapon to rob you of your security. Love should never cost you your self-respect. Love should never require you to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. I know there are people watching this right now who are in the same position I was. Maybe you are the black sheep. Maybe you are the scapegoat. Maybe you are the one who made it out only to be pulled back in by guilt trips and manipulation. You feel like you owe them something because they raised you. You feel like if you just give a little more, if you just forgive one more time, they will finally see you. They won't. The only way to win is to stop playing their game. The only way to find peace is to build your own fortress, one where the only people allowed inside are the ones who bring love, not lighter fluid. I want to hear from you now. I want to know that I am not alone in this. Have you ever been the one holding the checkbook while your family treated you like an ATM? Have you ever had to make the heartbreaking choice to cut off a parent or a sibling to save your own sanity? How did you find the courage to walk away? Please leave your story in the comments below. Let this be a space where we can speak the truth without judgment. Let's remind each other that we are not bad people for choosing our own survival. And if my story resonated with you, if you felt that spark of recognition, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with a friend who needs to hear that it is okay to say no. Share this with the sister who is tired of being the strong one. My name is Jasmine. I am a daughter, a sister, and a survivor. But above all, I am an auditor. I looked at the ledger of my life, I found the fraud, and I closed the account. And let me tell you, the balance sheet has never looked better. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, stay smart, and never let anyone take the keys to your happiness. We are often taught that family loyalty is unconditional, but Jasmine's story proves that blood is not a license for abuse. The hardest realization wasn't that she lost her home, but that her own family held the matches. True freedom isn't just about financial wealth. It is about having the resources to say no to toxicity without fear. You cannot save people who are determined to burn you down just to keep themselves warm. Walking away from those who hurt you is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-respect and survival. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to save your own sanity? Tell us your story in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else to finally choose themselves.